Let's talk a little bit about graphs. The graph feature provides the ability to report data in a visual format to clearly and effectively communicate or analyze financial information. Several variations of chart and pie graphs are available. And if we look at the online help for charts and pie graphs, you can see the list that is currently available. And scrolling down a little bit, we can see some examples of these different types of graphs. Now these are fairly straightforward, flat graphs. We do have some options that we'll be seeing as we work our way through today. And we're going to have a look at some of the 3D effects, line, SP line, and such as we go through. So there's a lot of different options available to us when it comes to building graphs within CaseView. Now there's also pie graphs, and time permitting, we'll have a look at some pie graphs as well. So let's go back to the slides and talk about how we would use a graph. An example of how we use graphs would be to visually analyze financial trends in a corporation. Accounts linked directly from the accounting database in working papers or time easily transform into graphical presentations. Cell values represents data points, which display as dots, lines, bars, or shaded areas in the graph. And a data series refers to a group of data points. For example, revenues, or perhaps we want to analyze our current assets over the course of a number of years. Each data series in a chart has a unique color for ease of identification. And labels can be assigned to each data series to appear along the x-axis, for example, the years. And charts can be shown with or without grid lines. Depending on the type of chart, it may be necessary to omit data points from each series. And you can specify the data points that you wish to plot. Now, any negative data points display a 0 in the graph if using a stacked chart type. To present negative values in a chart, select one of the following chart types: line, bar, points, or area. And we will see where we can make that selections as we work our way through today. And there is a preview available to us as we're building the graph so that we can see the chart as it would appear in our document. So let's get started. Now, I have taken the liberty of opening a CaseView document, and this document contains the data table at the top that you see here, and it has a current asset section and a related percentage of total current asset amounts, just for some extra information available on that. It also has some chart and pie graphs set up. Now these have already been predefined and saved, but we are going to take you through and create a new one. So the first graph that I want to create is going to be based on the current assets, and hopefully when we're done it will look like the first chart graph that we see here. So to build a graph, I need to be in the design mode. I'll select View Design Mode, and then I'm going to place my cursor where I want the graph to appear. Now it just so happens my cursor is exactly where I want it. Remember, in CaseView, cursor position is always critical. Always know where your cursor is before you start editing. To create the graph, I go to the Insert menu and I select Graph. And we have the choice here between a chart graph or a pie graph. For my first example, I'm going to create a chart graph, so I'm going to just click OK. This takes me to the Graph Properties dialog, and under Properties, I'm starting on the Fonts tab. Now, I'm not a big fan of Times New Roman, so I'm going to click on the font face under the main and subtitles and change this to Collaborate. There it is right there, and I'll make that selection. Now, I'm going to make these both bold as well, just to make them stand out a little bit. And at the moment, we haven't defined enough information for the preview to display a graph, so it reads incomplete data to create graph. So let's continue on to the labels area. For the main title text, I can either enter text in quotes or I can use a calculation to refer to the existing information. Now, if I just hit OK for a moment, that graph is not going to be created. I want to be able to see all my title information and cell numbers, so I'm going to double click to bring that back up and go back to the labels. Again, for my main title text, I can use a calculation. So here I want to enter a cell number from my data table, and that cell number is going to be DT1 for data table 1, cell E1, which is going to be my current assets description. For my subtitle, I'm going to use text here, so I'll just type in the word summary. There we go. My x-axis title is going to be the word year. And I don't have a cell right now representing that, so I'm just going to type the word year in here. And for my y-axis title, I am going to say amount. Now, had these items been in cells, I could have just referred to the cells. That way, if I change the cell value, it would automatically update my chart. Now, at this point, let's move on to the data that we're going to bring in. Now, in the table in the background, I have 5 series that I want to represent in this chart: cash, short-term investments, accounts receivable, inventory, and other current assets. And I have 3 labels: the years 2010, 11, and 12. So I'm going to insert labels and series using the insert buttons to get the layout I want. So to get 5 series, I'll insert 2, 3, 4 more. And to get the points that I'm looking for, the labels, I'll insert 2 more right there. And now I want to link my data table into my graph, including the titles. So I'm going to start off by double-clicking on my first label to highlight it and putting in DT1.C2. Now, if you look at my table, you'll notice that DT1.C2 is the year, and I want D2 and E2 in here as well, so I'll just continue doing that. DT1.D2 and DT1.E2. So now I've got my labels. I also want to identify each series. Now my series is going to go across the columns, and I see my cash description in cell DT1B3. And if I move to the side here, I have my other description columns as well. B4. Now this is the tedious part of setting up the graph. It does take a little bit of effort when we're putting it all together. Do I have B5 already? So B6, and I've got one more right here, B7. Oh, I should probably put in the DT1. Okay, so now I've got the titles for my years and the descriptions of the series that I'm running. I also have the option to create skip conditions for each label. So if I want to skip 2010, 2011, or 2012, I could put a value in here that is driven by a cell to determine whether or not that should skip. Similarly, if I wanted to skip any of the series, cash through other assets, other current assets, I could put skip conditions down here that tie into cell values or other information within working papers to determine whether or not an item is going to be presented. Now, in order to make this a little bit faster, I'm just going to highlight this and copy that to my clipboard. And I'm going to go across the page as I add the information in here. So what's left is to add the series information. So I'm just going to paste what I've got there, click beside it, and put a 2, oh, pardon me, a 3. Click here, paste, and that's a 4. As I mentioned, this is the tedious part, but once it's done, it is actually quite easy to work with. Now you may notice also as I'm doing this that the cells are listed over to the side here. So I'm going to see if I can't find D3. So there's D3 right here. I can select that and hit the button, and it moves it across. Now the problem that I just had is it created a new label which I didn't want, so I'm going to delete this point. Oops, clear that and remove, and I'll remove this one as well. Okay, so let's continue on the way I had it. I'm going to just hit the paste button, actually DT1.D, and that's going to be a 4, paste, and a 5, 6, and a 7. So there's only one more row. Now notice capitalization does not matter. We're referring to cells in a table. I do tend to like to use all caps when I do that, but it's not necessary. And we are on to column E. Almost there. And the last one, now while I was doing this, the graph was actually building in the preview area for me. So this is just a plain line graph that I've got showing right now. And I'm going to delete or remove that because I don't have that field. And so I'm all set with the starting of my data. The data is in there. Now that I have some data points entered, we can see that graph preview based on the current settings. But I want to change the settings, so let's continue on to our chart options. And here, under my formatting, page 1 of 2, we're able to adjust the graph width. I'm going to set that to 7.1 inches. And we could change the graph height as well, but I'm going to leave that at the default. We also have an option for the new look. Now that's checked right now, but I'm going to uncheck it because we're going to see different properties depending on whether the new look is selected or deselected. And you can see some of the items change in this page right here when I do that as well. Now I'm going to come back and turn it on. I do like the new look when I'm finished, but I want to show you as much property capabilities as we have. Now, for more information on new looks for graphs, I do encourage you to visit our Beyond the Balance archive, What's New in Working Papers 2014, which was recorded on November 7th, 2013. So let's start at the top here. The placeholder controls the appearance of the graph on screen. And I'd use this command to hide the graph and reduce its appearance on screen to a percentage of its original size. So right now it says don't hide, it's going to show 100%. If I make it 25%, it will shrink it down to 25% of its actual size, and that's how we'll see it. I'm going to say don't hide here, I don't want to reduce it. For my plotting method, this is going to allow me to select the type of chart to display the data. And where the new look option is checked, the points plus best fit line are not available. These graphs will convert to a point plus line graph instead. Now we can see a lot of the different options. I'm going to select today area stacked. So just go back up here and it gives me a slightly different view. Now the border style beside that is only available when new look option is not checked and is used to select the type of border to apply to elements in the graph. Now options include a drop-down shadow and a 3D inset as well as no border and thick line, etc. I'm going to leave it with a single line. My display style is available only again when new look option is not checked and provides options to display the chart as we see in the preview. Table, and note how the preview changes. So let me just go chart, is what we have there, table, and we only have the table, or I can choose both. And again, the preview refreshes to display what will appear when I click OK. Now I already have my data table at the top, so I'm going to just display my chart in this example. The colors option allows me to select to display the graph in color, grayscale, or grayscale with symbols. The grayscale with symbols options add symbols to each bar and to the legend, if displayed, to make it easier for users to differentiate between bars. We also have the grayscale printing option, which allows me to choose to have the graph print in grayscale regardless of the selected color option. Off to the left, the Show Legend option will allow me to select the placement of the legend, explaining the data that corresponds to the various colors of the graph. Or I can select Not Show so that a legend for the graph does not appear. I'm going to choose to select the graph legend to the right of my graph, and here you can see a legend then for each of the items that is listed in my graph. The Show Legend Even One Date Set allows me to select to show a legend for the chart even if there is only one data set plotted. Now, I have 5 data sets, so I'm not going to worry about that right now. If I choose the New Look box, I get an extra option, Legend Overlaps Chart, but this will only appear when the New Look option is checked. I can select this option to show a legend overlapping the chart based on the Show Legend selection, but I prefer to have my legend off to the side so it's not covering up the chart information. And remove that New Look so we can move on to the next page and see the format page 2 of 2. Under Properties here, I've selected the format page 2 of 2, and the grid line display is the first option that we have available, and this specifies the presentation of grid lines in the chart. This option is unavailable when we're creating a pie chart. We've got none, x-axis, y-axis in both, and currently I'm showing grid lines on both. The bar width option is available for bar graphs. This is not a bar graph right now, it's an area stack. But to select the percentage of the space the total data series takes up within each x-axis category, the percentage can set as low as 20% and all the way up to 100%. The grid in front of data is only available when the new look option is not checked, and we would select it to display the grid lines in front of the data. Solid thick line right here, up here, pardon me. And notice how the lines show up in front of the colors now, and if I uncheck it, the lines are lighter in the background. My grid line style allows me to go solid thick line, thick solid line, thin solid line, dotted line, or dash line, and I'm going to leave it on my thin solid line here. I also have a checkbox for the bar glass effect, and this is also available only when the new look option is not checked, and if I check that, it doesn't really look like a whole lot has changed for now, so I'm going to uncheck that. For bar graphs, we would select this option to enable simple shading and lighting effect for all bars. And again, I'm in an area stacked instead of a bar. Moving over to the grid line, we looked at those. Now there is another option that is only available when the new look option is checked, and that is use thick lines, and that'll be a checkbox that shows up right underneath the grid line here. My gradient style allows users the option to select a style to apply shading and lighting effects to the data instead of displaying a solid color. I'm going to leave it on my solid colors. And for my bevel style, this option is only available when new look option is not checked and allows the user to select a style to apply a shaded bevel effect to the data instead of displaying a solid color. So if I go medium gradual, we don't see too much change, but it will actually affect the final output when we're done. Finally, we have our shadow style, and option allows the user to select a style to apply a shadow or a 3D effect. Now, I like the 3D effects on our new graphs, so I'm going to choose 3D effect, and when I select new graph, we're going to see that graph change significantly. Before moving forward, I want to select the new look option right now, so let's jump back to format 1 of 2, choose new look, and check out that 3D effect from format 2 of 2. Now let's move on to our data points. Under points to graph, we have a number of available options. First of all, we can use choose points to plot all or the manually selected x-axis data points. If I choose select points, I then have to pick which points I want to have in my graph. I just selected all once again, so I'm going to go back to all points and leave it at all points. As a best practice, instead of manually selecting the x-axis data points, you could create skip conditions for each row in the data series table from the data tab, if you recall those skip fields that are available to us on both the rows and the columns. Under data options section, we use this to determine the rounding options for the graph. So use document rounding, right now it's set to none. Or we can round to ones, thousands, millions, whatever it happens to be. When the zeros, display zeros option is selected, and that is available only when I'm doing rounding, it will show let's say I'm rounding to 1,000. If I choose display zeros, it will show the thousands, and you can see that in my table at the bottom in my chart. When I turn that off, 400,000 becomes 400. I'm going to change this back to none. No rounding is being applied here. And we can use the decimal point selector to set the number of decimal points to display. And I'm going to show 2 decimal points just for fun. Moving on, we have our x-axis options. And we can use our label orientation option when the new look option is not checked to select the angle to display the x-axis label from the list. Now, new look is checked right now. So I'm just going to go back to that and uncheck it for a moment and come back to x-axis. Now here we have our various orientation capabilities and our threshold and maximum points. The threshold and maximum point options are only available when the new look option is not selected. We use these controls in tandem to control the number of labels to display on the x-axis. For the x-axis threshold, we indicate a maximum number of labels to display on the x-axis. And if the number of labels exceeds this amount, only the number of labels set under the x-axis maximum points option display. So maximum points, I say 10, threshold is 25, and it would go in increments at that point. For example, if the x-axis threshold is set to 25, as I have here, and the x-axis maximum points are only set to 5, the graph actually has 30 points with potential labels. CaseView calculates and displays only 5 evenly distributed labels on the x-axis. And for best results, select a maximum points number that divides evenly into the total number of labels in the graph. And so I'm going to change this back to 10 and leave it as is. For my y-axis, we can select the manually set scale option to set the y-axis scale manually. Once selected, in the appropriate fields, we can type in a value or click on the calculation button to enter formulas setting the minimum and maximum values for the y-axis. One of the uses of this feature is by setting up the minimum and maximum values for a graph, the user can set the same values for multiple graphs and be able to demonstrate a true comparison between graphs. For the padding option, we can select the percentage of space that displays between the maximum data value and the top of the graph, and the default value is 5%. This option is only available when the manually set y-axis scale checkbox is not selected. And we also can select include zero axis, and that would put a 0 in there for us. But again, the option is only available when manually set y-axis scale is not checked. Now I'm going to move this along. We do have some colors available to us here, but before I do that, we can set the frequency, line frequency, tick frequency being displayed, and text formatting, so any information you want to show before and after the text is available. Moving down to colors. On the Colors tab, the Graph Properties dialog specifies the color of each data series on the graph and also the background colors of the graph. So we select a graph area, click on the color selector, and select the corresponding color. There are 40 default colors available for each selection and more color options at the bottom of the color list to modify an existing color or add an additional color. To set the opacity of that color, we use the slides to control that information. And we can check the follow paragraph shade color to use the current paragraph color for the desk area surrounding the graph. The desk option represents the background color of the area surrounding the graph, and colors can be selected only when the follow paragraph shade color is selected. Now the rest of these items are fairly straightforward, but that is how we set up the graph. Now I'm going to go back to my format 1 and use the new look. And when I click OK, in goes my graph. Now for mine, I put my labels off to the side, so my legend's on the side. The one below it, put the legend down at the bottom. So let me double click on that and go back to my legend. Show legend is under format 1.2 and move that to the bottom. And we can have a look at how that turns out. And that is exactly like the graph that was in there previously. And so I'm going to keep that as it is. Now some of the other graphs that I have shown here, I've just changed the format. This one is an area stacked percent graph. If I move down a little bit further, there's a bar graph that's been stacked. And I also have a nice little ribbon graph here and an area graph that is not stacked. So there's just some of the examples that I was talking about a little bit earlier. Now we are cutting close on time, but I do want to show you some pie graphs as well. I've built 3 pie graphs, and what I did with the pie graph is I used the same data series, but here I inverted it, so I've got the years across the top and the data down the side so that I can show the years specifically. So my fonts, I kept the fonts the way they were. I didn't use a subtitle this time. Labels, I used the DT1.E1, which is current assets, and summary was typed in. For my data, as we see here, I just inverted that and changed the series to points and points to series, and we have the skip options available to us. For my pie option formatting, I've got my width and height once again. I'm showing my numbers and label. I could show numbers only or label only if I choose. I like the 3D effect, so I'm using 3D. I can go 3D and shadow there as well. Oh, that looks good too. Legend is across the bottom right now. I'm not grouping my slices, but I could choose to group slices that were, say, less than 5%. And that took 2 of the slices and merged them together. I'm going to say no grouping, and it brings them back to the way it was. The radius or width of the graph is available to me here, and I can increase that or decrease that. And I have my starting position, which is at 95 degrees at the moment. As I increase that, we can see how that rotates for me through the pie. I'm going to go back to 95. For my placeholder, I am not hiding in the document. My border style is available. My gradient is curved. I can go inset, or I can also choose to highlight, but I really like that new curved look to my pie charts. And we have color control as well, color grayscale and grayscale and symbols, with the grayscale printing option available to us. For my data, I've chosen in this graph Series 1, which happens to be my 2010 data. And I'm showing percentage, but I might want to show the numeric value, and we have our numeric values showing right there. I'm going to go back to percentage because I think that provides a little more information for comparative purposes between years if we're looking at percentage of total current assets as we go through. And there are some other nice rounding capabilities here, so if we want to get a few more percentage points, see what's going on there. And our slice customization. Now I've selected slices to explode. That means it's going to push it away from the table. But if I go with default, see how it ties it all together here. And we can even choose which data points we want to buy. Maybe I don't want to show cash. I can turn cash off, and that makes up the rest of the information. So there's a lot of great functionality, a lot of great features in here. For my graph, we have our shading and our coloring. And we also have our pie color. So if I don't like that green for cash, I might want to choose a nice soft blue color. So complete control over how that graph shows as well. And okay. So the big difference when I'm creating a pie graph is that I'm going to insert it through the graphs as well, but I'll choose pie here instead. Now it's worth noting that on the right-click menu on either graphs, we have the ability to edit it, convert it from a pie to a chart or a chart to a pie. We can export it to an image format. We have the ability to hide it, and then the standard cut, copy, paste format, and so on down this. We can even add an issue to this particular item. If I want to hide the entire graph, I would most likely put a section around it with the skip condition in my section to toggle that on and off when needed and when not needed.